Welcome back to Movies Outpost. Today we'll be diving into the action-thrilling trilogy titled The Rise, Dawn, and War of the Planet of the Apes. Enjoy the recap. Through the thickness of a lush forest, a tribe of chimps roams harmoniously. The leader pauses, sensing danger as the birds scatter from the trees. Without warning, the peace shatters, hunters bursting onto the scene. One young chimp almost breaks free but is snatched and locked in a cruel metal prison, left to gaze helplessly at the world she's ripped away from. Fast forward, and we find scientists Dr. Will Rodman and Robert Franklin ecstatic as they watch this chimp, affectionately named Bright Eyes, conquer a challenging intelligence test. Wasting no time, Will rushes to his superior, Stephen Jacobs, claiming success of their 5-year project, the ALZ-112 virus. Hoping to initiate human testing, Stephen sends Will to pitch their progress to the board. Will passionately explains how their virus has upgraded Bright Eyes, transforming her from an average chimp into a puzzle-solving whiz, positioning their creation as a potential Alzheimer's cure. However, in the lab, things take a turn. Bright Eyes is prepped for her grand presentation, but she unexpectedly reacts with hostility. Despite Franklin's soothing attempts with her preferred beverage, the sight of a tranquilizer sends her into a panic. As Will is assuring the board of only minor side effects, chaos erupts. The frightened Bright Eyes breaks free, tearing through the facility and disrupting the meeting in a frantic frenzy, only to meet her untimely end at the hands of security. Shocked faces fill the room as Bright Eyes falls lifeless onto the conference table. The aftermath? Stephen orders an immediate end to all test subjects. Franklin pleads for mercy, emphasizing the emotional bonds these animals form, but Stephen remains unmoved, his priorities solely on their financial bottom line. Will implores Stephen to give ALZ-112 another shot, but Stephen is unyielding. When Franklin stumbles upon a newborn chimp in Bright Eyes' enclosure, it dawns on them. Bright Eyes' violent outburst was a mother's desperate attempt to protect her offspring. Faced with Franklin's refusal to euthanize another creature, and with the baby chimp now in his arms, Will reluctantly agrees to take the little one in. Home, he finds his father, Charles, laboring over the piano keys, Alzheimer's confusing his son's pivotal day with a simple chemistry test. Introducing the baby chimp to Charles, he's touched by his father's affection for the tiny creature. Later, roused by the newborn's cries, Will finds himself bathing and cradling the little one, his mind clouded with uncertainties about his research. Then, in a fleeting moment of connection, the baby chimp grips his finger, filling Will with renewed hope. Against all odds, the baby chimp, barely a day old, shows surprising independence by feeding itself. Upon closer look, Will finds the distinctive green flecks in its eyes. Fast forward 3 years, and this chimp, now named Caesar, is the center of Will's attention and research, rapidly adapting to human life and exhibiting remarkable intellect, including flawlessly solving a Lucas Tower puzzle. Caesar enjoys the freedom of his own space in the attic, from where he curiously watches the world outside his window. But as Will documents Caesar's astounding progress, he is jolted by a disturbance from upstairs. Charles in a heated argument with his nurse, resulting in a shattered lamp. Overwhelmed, the nurse resigns on the spot, suggesting that Charles might be better off in a nursing home. Unwilling to let his father languish, Will swipes a few vials of the forbidden ALZ-112 from his lab, administering a dose to Charles under Caesar's watchful eyes. The very next day, Charles' talent for the piano returns in full force, leaving Will misty-eyed at his father's sudden return to normalcy. Meanwhile, Caesar's curiosity is piqued by neighborhood kids cruising on their bikes. The lure of adventure leads him to sneak out of an open window and into the neighbor's shed where he finds a bike. But his exploration is cut short when Douglas Hunsicker, the neighbor, discovers him and angrily chases him with a bat. Will intervenes just in time, saving a frightened and injured Caesar. His injuries lead them to Caroline, a zoo vet, who treats the young chimp. Caesar's relaxed demeanor and his sign language exchanges with Will leave Caroline intrigued. Will sheepishly translates Caesar's signs, suggesting they should go out for dinner. As Will and Caroline grow closer, she gets a tour of Caesar's attic room, applauding Will's care but voicing her worry for Caesar's future. She confesses her love for chimps but also her underlying fear of them. In response, Caesar jokingly mimics beating Will, displaying his understanding. They share a laugh and Caroline proposes providing Caesar with more outdoor space. This advice takes them to Muir Woods, where Caesar gets his first taste of the wilderness. As Will unfastens Caesar's leash, the chimp pauses, raising his palm towards Will. Caroline interprets it as a request for permission and guides Will's hand to give it. Excitedly, Caesar dives into the lush greenery, quickly locating a towering tree and climbing up with ease, making Will glad to see him so comfortable in the wild. Fast forward 5 years, and Caesar has come to cherish his escapades in the Muir Woods. Caesar takes to scaling the tallest trees, from where he enjoys gazing at the San Francisco skyline. Meanwhile, Will and Caroline hang out, though Caesar struggles with a hint of jealousy as he shares Will's attention. Playfully, he disrupts them, pretending it's all in good fun. One day, on their way back, Caesar confronts a barking dog, silencing it with an intimidating screech. However, noticing their leashes, he inquires if he's considered a pet. Will reassures him, patiently explaining that he views himself as Caesar's father. Caesar's skepticism leads Will to take him to Gen Sis, where he reveals the tragic story of Caesar's mother and how he ended up in Will's care. He goes on to explain the purpose of the drug tested on Caesar's mother, the same drug he used on Charles, and how its effects passed on to Caesar. At home, Will confides in Caroline about his motives for saving Caesar, oblivious then to the extraordinary abilities Caesar would inherit. He explains how the drug he created was meant to mend damaged brain cells, but in Caesar's case, it triggered extraordinary brain development. Caroline, however, questions where Caesar fits into this grand scheme. Despite her concerns, Will insists that his groundbreaking work could restore lives to Alzheimer's patients like his father. All the while, Caesar eavesdrops from the attic, perturbed by the revelations about his origin. The next morning, he refuses his breakfast, the weight of his newfound knowledge still looming. As Charles fumbles with his utensils due to his progressing Alzheimer's, Caesar assists him, but a shared glance between him and Will reveals their shared concern. When Will tests Charles' blood, he discovers that his body has developed antibodies against the cure. In the meantime, a disoriented Charles wanders off and gets into Hunsaker's car, clumsily crashing it into other parked vehicles. Hunsaker's anger explodes at the confused Charles, and from his attic window, Caesar observes the escalating tension. Pushed to his limit, Caesar rushes out and pounces on Hunsaker, unleashing his rage on the man who was yelling at his grandfather. In the heat of the moment, Caesar leaps at the retreating Hunsaker, furiously biting off his finger. It's only when Charles intervenes, shouting for him to stop, that Caesar snaps back to reality. Overwhelmed by remorse, Caesar retreats into Charles's arms as onlookers gape in fear. Following this incident, Caesar is relocated to a primate sanctuary managed by John Landon, his son Dodge, and another caretaker, Rodney. Despite Will's apprehension about Caesar's lack of socialization with his own kind, Langdon is confident that Caesar will adjust well. At first, Caesar seems thrilled with the new spacious surroundings, but his excitement turns into distress as he realizes he's been left behind. Despite his pleas to go home, Will can only offer comforting words and a promise to return soon, leaving a heartbroken Caesar behind. Once Will and Caroline depart, Dodge ushers Caesar into a cage where he encounters other primates, their distress echoing around him. Back home, Will tries to appeal for Caesar's release but faces bureaucratic hurdles. Exasperated, he argues with the unresponsive clerk who in return admonishes him to be grateful that Caesar wasn't euthanized. At home, Charles' condition deteriorates, with him lapsing into periods of confusion and melancholy, missing Caesar. After testing, Will confirms his worst fears. The drug's effects have worn off, and Charles' Alzheimer's is advancing rapidly. Faced with the prospect of losing both Caesar and his father, Will is spurred to further refine the virus. In a bid to convince Stephen to resume his research, Will confesses that he administered the drug to Charles, achieving notable results. Spotting a lucrative opportunity, Stephen gives the green light to develop ALZ-113, a gas-based evolution of the previous virus. Meanwhile, at the primate sanctuary, Caesar endures deplorable conditions and harsh treatment, including being fed unpalatable slop. Revolted, Caesar flings the gruel at Dodge, who responds with a powerful spray from a hose. Once Dodge departs, Caesar retreats to a corner of his cage, sketching the attic window from his previous home on the wall as a comfort. Back at Gen Sis, primates are brought in for testing the upgraded virus. Will selects Koba, a chimp trained to ask for food, for their inaugural trial. However, things go awry as a terrified Koba inadvertently knocks off Franklin's mask, exposing him directly to the ALZ-113 gas. In the sanctuary's communal area, Caesar has his first encounter with the alpha chimp, Rocket, who asserts his dominance by tearing Caesar's shirt and knocking him to the ground. Caesar makes a run for it, clambering up a tree, but Rocket catches up, and the altercation ends with Caesar tumbling down. Before Rocket can strike again, Dodge sedates them both. At Gen Size, Stephen is exhilarated to witness Koba spell out his name, though he remains unaware of Franklin's deteriorating health. At the sanctuary, Caesar finds an unlikely ally in Maurice, an orangutan who communicates with him using sign language. Maurice reveals his background in a circus and warns Caesar to be cautious since humans are wary of intelligent apes. When Will and Caroline visit, Caesar expresses his pain through sign language. Infuriated, Will confronts Dodge, but Langdon steps in to prevent the situation from escalating. Determined to remove Caesar from this abusive environment, Will attempts to reclaim him, only to be reminded by Langdon that he requires a court order. Although Caesar pleads to go home, Will can only promise to secure his release as soon as possible, leaving Caesar behind yet again. Overwhelmed by feelings of betrayal, Caesar vents his frustration by obliterating the attic window drawing he had made on his cage wall. As he explores the enclosure, Caesar discovers a ladder leading to a skylight and observes Buck, a sizable gorilla who is never let out of his cage. From the skylight, he gazes upon the city's skyline, the sight stoking his yearning for freedom. One day, Dodge and his friends pay a visit to the primate sanctuary, using a taser to taunt the confined apes. Seeing an opportunity, Caesar deftly snatches a knife from an unwary visitor who leans in too close. Under the cover of night, Caesar puts the stolen knife to use, freeing himself from his cage. Maurice quietly observes as Caesar takes his first steps towards liberation. Caesar unlocks Buck's cage and rouses him. Although initially reluctant, Buck eventually embraces his newfound freedom, galloping joyously around the open space. His triumphant roar echoes through the sanctuary, and he gratefully acknowledges Caesar for his release. Caesar continues his liberation mission, freeing Rocket next. Rather than running, Caesar confronts Rocket, throwing him to the ground but sparing him any further harm. When Rocket sees Buck out of his cage and the other apes observing, he acknowledges his defeat, raising a palm in submission to the new alpha, Caesar. Back at home, Will attempts to administer the ALZ-113 to Charles, but he refuses. As they share a tender moment holding hands in sleep, Charles passes away, leaving Will in mourning. After the funeral, while tidying up, Will stumbles upon a photograph of him with Caesar, which brings his remorse to the surface. Comforting him, Caroline gently suggests that it's time for him to accept that some things are beyond our power to change. Following the discovery that Stephen expedited the trials to rush the sale of ALZ-113, Will warns him about potential unforeseen side effects in humans. Stephen retorts that Will administered an experimental drug to his own father, a point that stumps Will. Seeing the path Stephen is on and the risk to his career, Will decides to resign. Meanwhile, Franklin's condition deteriorates further. Desperate for help, he visits Will's home, but no one is there. He stumbles upon Hunsaker, accidentally sneezing blood onto him. Later, Will attempts to buy Caesar's release from Langdon, but his reunion with Caesar doesn't go as planned. Still feeling hurt and betrayed, Caesar turns away from Will, choosing to stay in his cage. However, Caesar begins making strategic moves within the sanctuary. He instructs Rocket to distribute cookies among the other apes, a gesture that earns their trust. The next day, during their time in the atrium, Maurice asks Caesar about his strategy. Caesar explains that a single monkey is weak, but together, they're a formidable force. However, Maurice retorts that monkeys are stupid. This prompts Caesar to contemplate their situation further. Caesar observes Rodney punch a code into the door lock, and later that night he uses this knowledge to escape the sanctuary. He travels back to Will's home, where he finds Will and Caroline asleep together. Locating the ALZ-113, Caesar deduces that it can make the apes intelligent. He takes it back to the sanctuary and administers it to the other apes. The following day, Caesar examines the apes' eyes, which now bear green flecks, a sign of their heightened intelligence. He realizes that they've all been successfully affected by the drug, confirming that they're now hyper-intelligent. Langdon notices unusual behavior among the animals. They're gathered and standing upright, but he dismisses it as insignificant. Meanwhile, a grim scene unfolds elsewhere, as Franklin is discovered dead in his bed, his body covered in blood. Back at the sanctuary, Caesar displays newfound defiance, refusing to return to his cage and initiating a fight with Dodge. When Dodge insults him by calling him a dirty ape, Caesar retaliates verbally for the first time. No! Before knocking Dodge unconscious. He then proceeds to release all the other primates. Rodney attempts to intervene but gets attacked. Caesar, recognizing that Rodney never truly harmed them, spares his life, opting to cage him instead. When Dodge regains consciousness and reaches for his taser, Caesar uses a hose on him, which results in Dodge's death due to the water amplifying the electrical charge. With their path clear, the apes break free from the sanctuary through the skylight, splitting into two groups led by Caesar and Buck. The next day, Will notices signs of recent activity in Caesar's room. Unable to reach anyone at the sanctuary, he and Caroline decide to investigate. They arrive to find the sanctuary in shambles, Dodge's lifeless body, and an ALZ-113 container punctured. Caroline discovers Rodney in a cage, who tells them that Caesar spoke. Residents in the suburbs are taken aback when they see apes traveling through the trees. Caesar's group reaches Genesis, where they wreak havoc in the labs and free the imprisoned primates, including Koba. Stephen receives a call informing him of Franklin's death, caused by the ALZ-113 virus. Arriving at his office, he's horrified to find the lobby in ruins and the apes looming ominously overhead. Panicked, Panicked, Steven escapes in a chopper. Over at the zoo, people are enjoying the primates exhibit. However, their excitement quickly turns to terror when Buck charges towards them. After releasing the captive apes at the zoo, Buck and the others arm themselves with broken pieces of fence railing. The liberated apes join the rest of Caesar's group to invade the city, causing chaos as they rampage through the streets. When animal control captures one of their own, Caesar and the others retaliate by hurling makeshift spears at the vehicle. They manage to rescue their captured comrade and continue wreaking havoc across the city, causing extensive damage to buildings and infrastructure. Police response is swift, but the apes are prepared. Maurice hurls a drainage cover at a police car while Buck tosses a street lamp. From the top of a cable car, Caesar and his group look out over the Golden Gate Bridge, assessing the traffic situation. Realizing their destination, Will and Caroline deduce that the apes are headed toward the woods. Steven and the officers in a helicopter overhead also observe the apes moving north. At the end of the bridge, police officers prepare to confront the apes with lethal force. Caesar halts his group and formulates a plan, directing some apes to scale the bridge while others traverse underneath it. Caroline manages to distract the police, allowing Will to sneak past them. The ensuing battle between apes and humans is horrifying, with Caesar and Buck engaging in direct combat with the officers. When one of the apes falls under gunfire from the helicopter, Maurice is enraged. In the thick fog, the human forces struggle to locate the apes. Utilizing a bus for cover, the guerrillas shield themselves while the apes on the bridge close in for the attack. Simultaneously, the apes on the bridge's upper and lower sections launch their assault, overpowering the humans. As the battle rages, Will manages to reach Caesar. The two share a brief, understanding glance before the helicopter reappears, opening fire on the apes. In a desperate attempt to protect Caesar, Buck leaps onto the chopper, resulting in a catastrophic crash on the bridge. Caesar pulls a mortally wounded Buck from the wreckage. As Buck dies, holding Caesar's hand, Steven calls out for help. Caesar simply glares at him before leaving the scene, continuing his mission. Emerging from the fog, Koba confronts Steven. With a fierce snarl and bared teeth, Koba forcefully kicks the wreckage of the chopper off the bridge. Steven plummets into the abyss below, screaming as he falls. Meanwhile, Will commandeers a police car, trailing the apes as they make their way to the safety of the forest. He calls out to Caesar, only to be attacked by Koba. Caesar intervenes just in time, sending Koba away with a forceful command. Will apologizes to Caesar and promises to protect him if he would only return home. In response, Caesar gently pulls Will close, whispering,
"Caesar is home."
The shock of hearing Caesar speak leaves Will momentarily stunned, but he accepts the truth of the situation. Returning to the rest of the apes, Caesar stands tall and proud. The others regard him with respect and admiration, acknowledging him as their leader. With Will's silent blessing, Caesar ascends into the treetops, taking one last look over the San Francisco skyline. Hunsaker, the aggressive neighbor, arrives at the airport for a flight. He suddenly experiences a nosebleed and casually wipes his nose. Unknowingly, he continues on to his flight, carrying and potentially spreading the deadly virus even further. The virus, now known as the simian flu, leaks into the human world and causes a global pandemic. Fast forward and we're possibly facing the threat of humans becoming the next dodo birds. 10 years later, our chimps are not so chimp-like anymore. They're full-blown apes now, with their own languages and society. They work together like a well-oiled machine, hunt in packs, and show empathy for each other. The head honcho of this ape society, Caesar, and he's got his son Blue Eyes by his side. After nailing a hunt, they head back home on horseback, bringing home the trophies. Their community's like an ape village tucked away in the woods, with alphabet lessons, murals, wooden structures, and hunting tools. They've even figured out how to play with fire. Coming home, Caesar is greeted with the sight of his newborn son. He shares the joyous news with Blue Eyes. He then chit-chats with Maurice, the brown ape and resident teacher, about how far their civilization has come. Maurice, always the philosopher, brings up humans, who Caesar had a bit of a history with. Caesar admits that he does think about them sometimes, highlighting how they differ. Humans, they can't stop fighting. But apes, they stick together, they're family. Caesar ponders if humans have gone the way of the dinosaurs, but Maurice ain't so sure, reminding him they haven't seen a human face in over 10 years. This takes a turn when a couple of apes run into a real-life human on a hunting trip. The man, scared out of his wits, whips out a gun and fires a shot, injuring one of the apes. This incident gets the ape tribe hot under the collar and they hoof it to the scene. Turns out, our lone gunman isn't so alone. He's got a crew of 6 more humans with him. Malcolm, the guy calling the shots, tries to calm the storm, insisting they meant no harm. As he locks eyes with Caesar, he gets the sense that there's something different about these apes. But before he can dwell on it, Caesar roars, telling them to beat it. The apes chase the humans away, causing one to drop their bag in the rush. Maurice scoops up the bag, passing it to Caesar. Caesar then instructs Koba, one of his trusty lieutenants, and a couple of other apes to tail the humans back to their base. The humans make it back to a quarantine zone, where their boss, Dreyfus, and some soldiers are holed up. They report back about their run-in with the apes and the dam, their initial reason for being in the area. Malcolm joins them in the car as they head back to the settlement. But the humans got another curveball to deal with. They spill the beans to Dreyfus about the evolved apes they encountered. Dreyfus quickly decides to keep a lid on it, worried it could spark mass hysteria. Ellie, Malcolm's wife and a once-upon-a-time doctor, drops another bombshell. The surviving humans are the lucky ones, the genetic lottery winners immune to the virus. Back at the ape village, Caesar's holding a powwow about the human situation. A few apes are itching for a fight, considering the humans shot first, but Caesar's trying to play peacemaker, warning that war could wreck everything they've built. Koba, however, has a bone to pick with humans. He thinks they need to flex their muscles and show the humans who's boss. So Caesar rallies the troops and they make a grand entrance into the human settlement. The humans are scared, sure, but they're also intrigued and come out to see what the fuss is all about. Caesar lays down the law, stating he ain't looking for a war but won't back down if pushed. Before leaving, he gives back the dropped bag, warning them to keep their distance. Now the humans are on edge, fearing what the apes might do, but Dreyfus steps up, delivering a heartfelt speech promising they'll find another way to keep the lights on, even without the dam. Once the crowds calm down a bit, Malcolm pulls Dreyfus aside and breaks it to him. There ain't another power source, the dam's all they got. Facing desperate times, Dreyfus is ready to rumble with the apes. He explains they need power to reach out to any potential survivors across the globe through their radio transmitter. Malcolm, not ready to see more lives lost, strikes a bargain. He asks Dreyfus for 3 days to parley with Caesar, showing him the returned bag as proof that Caesar ain't your average ape. Dreyfus agrees, but warns if Malcolm doesn't pull it off, things could get ugly. So Malcolm gears up for the risky trip. He loops Ellie into the plan, and with their son Alexander and the rest of their crew, they head toward the ape territory. Arriving on a gloomy, rainy evening, Malcolm instructs his team to stay put and head back if he doesn't return within 2 hours. As he approaches the ape settlement, a bunch of less than thrilled apes haul him in front of the whole tribe. There, Malcolm puts his hands up in surrender. On the central tribal platform, Caesar steps forward to face him. Malcolm pleads with Caesar, insisting he's not there for a fight and has something important to show him. Caesar hushes the crowd, lending an ear to Malcolm's request. Malcolm, Caesar, and a few apes head off to the dam. Once there, Malcolm does his best to lay out the plan, how the dam could be their ticket to getting the power back up and running for the humans. Malcolm's in for a surprise when Caesar actually gets what he's saying about generating electricity. He assures Caesar they're not out to hurt the apes and offers himself as a bargaining chip. Caesar agrees to let them work, but insists they give up their guns first. Back at the ape village, Koba ain't too happy with Caesar's call. He fears that powering up the humans could spell trouble for the apes. But Caesar's set on peace, reminding Koba that's what this is all about. Koba pushes back, showing his scars as proof of what humans can do. But Caesar quickly shuts him down, reminding him who's boss. Next day, as Malcolm's crew gets down to business under Caesar's watchful eye, Koba and his crew sneak off to the human settlement. They discover an armory, packed to the brim with weapons. But they get caught by a couple of armed guys who corner Koba. Quick thinking, Koba plays the harmless, confused ape card, doing some random movements that fool the humans. They let Koba go, convinced he's just a lost ape. Back at the dam, there's trouble in paradise when an accident traps Malcolm and his crew under a pile of debris, injuring Carver in the process. The apes rush to the scene, helping dig out Malcolm and his men. Malcolm thanks Caesar for the rescue and, given the accident and Carver's condition, asks for more time to complete the work. Just as things seem to be calming down, a baby ape, Caesar's youngest, wanders over to the humans. The little tyke stumbles upon a hidden gun in Carver's stuff, immediately putting the apes on high alert. Carver pulls out a shotgun, pointing it at the apes. But Caesar isn't having it. He disarms Carver and knocks him down, raising the gun to strike. Malcolm steps in, pleading with Caesar to stop. In a fury, Caesar aims the gun at Malcolm, reminding him of their no-gun rule. He shows leniency though, chucking the shotgun into the river and ordering the humans to skedaddle. As they pack up to leave, Malcolm and Ellie rush back to Caesar hoping to explain themselves. They're taken to Caesar's home, where they discover his wife is seriously ill. Ellie offers her medical aid, and a grateful Caesar gives them another day to work, with his apes helping to speed things up. But Carver he's sent packing, forced to cool his heels in the truck. Shortly after, Koba and his crew come back with news of the human weapons. Koba heads to the dam and goes after Alexander. Malcolm tries to defuse the situation, but it's Maurice, surprising everyone, who steps in to shield them from Koba. But then Caesar shows up. Koba confronts him, accusing him of putting humans before their own kind. That sends Caesar into a rage, and he lays into Koba. It's a one-sided fight, and Koba doesn't stand a chance. Caesar nearly chokes Koba, but he stops himself, remembering their code: apes don't kill apes. A beaten Koba picks himself up and apologizes to Caesar. Later that night, Koba privately talks to Blue Eyes, urging him to protect Caesar since he no longer trusts Koba. He confides his worry that Caesar's trust in humans might end up threatening his own life. The next day, Maurice visits Alexander, who thanks him for standing up to Koba by giving him a book. They bond over it, sharing a peaceful moment. Meanwhile, Koba goes back to the armory where he again fools the two drinking men from before. But this time he grabs a gun, kills them, and heads back with his new firepower. Back at the dam, Malcolm and his team finally fix the generator. Later that night, they stumble upon a gas station in the woods, complete with a convenience store. The group kicks back, listening to some tunes. Malcolm tells Caesar they've done their part and will be heading back. Caesar responds, stating his trust in them, and the two share a handshake. Carver, sitting alone thinking about his actions, is ambushed by the spiteful Koba. Meanwhile, the others head back to the settlement, the lights now shining bright, a testament to their success. But just when things are looking up, Caesar spots a sneaky Koba, armed and ready. Without missing a beat, Koba shoots Caesar and quickly hides as Caesar falls to his death. Another ape loyal to Koba starts a fire, burning down houses, and chaos ensues among the apes. Maurice quickly grasps the situation, urging Malcolm and his group to flee while he leads them out. Koba seizes this moment of confusion, falsely blaming the humans for Caesar's shooting in the fire. He declares himself the new leader and rallies the apes for an all-out attack on the humans. Meanwhile, in the now power-lit city, celebrations are in full swing. Dreyfus and his men finally manage to contact other cities, but their joy is short-lived as the apes storm the armory, taking the human weapons. Alerted to the assault, Dreyfus orders an evacuation of the settlement, arms his forces, and readies themselves for a standoff. As the mist rolls in, the silhouette of apes on horseback looms ominously. They open fire, forcing Dreyfus and his troops to duck for cover. Despite being outgunned, Dreyfus and his men respond with force, leading to a bloodbath. Koba, upon seeing the struggle of his tribe, mounts a horse and launches an aggressive one-ape assault. Dreyfus, seeing Koba's rampage, fires a rocket launcher, stalling the ape advance momentarily. But the apes' numbers prove too overwhelming, pushing through the first line of human defense. Just when the situation seems dire, a tank rolls in, decimating a large number of apes. Koba, however, quickly adapts, intercepts the tank, and turns it against the humans, breaking their defense. Dreyfus can only watch in horror as his attempts to safeguard his people crumble before his eyes. Amidst the chaos, Malcolm and his group find a wounded Caesar in the woods. Upon realizing it was an ape who shot him, they rush to get him out of there. As they retreat, the ape horde continues to pursue the humans, intent on their capture. One human attempts to slow the apes down but is swiftly overpowered by Koba. Koba orders another ape to finish the man, but he hesitates, knowing Caesar wouldn't approve. In a fit of anger, Koba drags the resistant ape upstairs and hurls him off the railing, killing him. This act of violence serves as a warning to the other apes, including Blue Eyes, reinforcing Koba's claim to leadership. The apes successfully round up the remaining humans and take them to be enslaved. Meanwhile, Malcolm and his group, following Caesar's directions, arrive at an abandoned city. Here they find themselves in Caesar's former home, revealing to the group that Caesar once lived with a human. Malcolm heads back to the settlement to retrieve the surgical supplies necessary to treat Caesar's injuries, leaving Ellie to care for him. In the settlement, the apes are now holding the humans captive in cages, with Koba dispatching squads of apes to find and capture any remaining humans. Blue Eyes, in the midst of the chaos, is shocked to see Maurice and other apes held captive for their loyalty to Caesar. Maurice advises Blue Eyes to take care of himself, reinforcing the reality of their dire situation. Back in the settlement, Malcolm successfully retrieves the medical kit but encounters difficulties on his way out, as roaming apes block his path. Just when it appears he'll be caught, an ape holding a gun confronts him. It turns out to be Blue Eyes, who assists Malcolm when he learns that his father, Caesar, is still alive. Malcolm brings Blue Eyes to Caesar, and a joyful reunion takes place. Caesar confesses his mistakes to Blue Eyes, his misguided trust in Koba, his misconceptions about humans and apes. Blue Eyes updates Caesar about Maurice, the captive apes, and the tragic death of Ash. This motivates Caesar even more to stop Koba, and Blue Eyes promises to aid him. The next day, Blue Eyes formulates a plan to free the imprisoned apes. He lures the guards into the prison bus where the combined strength of Maurice and the others enables them to overpower the guards. With Blue Eyes' help, they release the captive apes, along with the human prisoners, signaling the start of their revolt against Koba's tyranny. As Caesar nostalgically revisits his old home, he finds a camera and tenderly watches a recording of his past time with Will. Malcolm interrupts this poignant moment, and they have a brief conversation before Blue Eyes and the refugees arrive. Learning of Koba's impending plans from Blue Eyes, Caesar, Malcolm, and the others head quickly towards the settlement. In the tunnel, Malcolm encounters Dreyfus, who reveals his plan to blow up the tower where the apes have gathered. Torn, Malcolm finally decides to take a stand, pointing a rifle at Dreyfus's team, urging them to give Caesar and the apes a chance. Simultaneously, Caesar and his group reach the top of the tower where Koba and his followers are. After a terse exchange of viewpoints and insults, Caesar and Koba engage in a one-on-one fight to determine the superior leader. Their brutal confrontation sees them falling amidst the debris of the tower. Although Koba initially gains the upper hand, Caesar recovers, leaving Koba injured from their fall. Amidst this tense situation, Malcolm continues his effort to persuade Dreyfus to give the apes a chance, attempting to prevent further bloodshed and destruction. The battle rages on at the top of the tower. Koba, weaponizing a metal rod, aggressively launches himself at Caesar, who nimbly leaps from platform to platform to evade him. The chase comes to a halt when Caesar arms himself with a metal stair-step for defense. Caesar chastises Koba, expressing his regret for trusting him as a brother. In response, Koba claims he fights solely for the apes' cause, but Caesar counters him, accusing Koba of fighting only for himself. This enrages Koba further, who continues his assault, ignoring his painful wounds. Finding an opening when Koba is debilitated by his injuries, Caesar strikes back fiercely, targeting Koba's wounds. The tables turn with Caesar gaining the upper hand, relentlessly driving Koba to the brink of defeat. Still, Koba persists, refusing to yield. Meanwhile, Malcolm's effort to stall Dreyfus and his team ends in vain as Dreyfus manages to grab the detonator. Pausing, Dreyfus tells Malcolm he's doing this to save the human race, before triggering the explosion that obliterates the tower's foundation and kills him along with his team. Malcolm, however, narrowly escapes the blast by leaping to a safe spot by the side of the tracks. The intense explosion disrupts the fierce duel between Caesar and Koba, causing the tower to start collapsing and leading to more ape casualties. Yet Caesar, his loyal followers, and several other apes survive the blast. So does Koba, who grabs a firearm from a fallen ape in a desperate bid for power. Koba opens fire, aiming at Caesar and his fellow apes, aiding the wounded. One of the shots hits Maurice, leading Caesar to react with fury. He lunges at Koba, tackling him to the edge of the crumbling tower where Koba clings precariously to a deteriorating platform. Approaching the edge, Caesar is confronted by Koba's plea for mercy, reminding him that apes do not kill each other. As if to aid him, Caesar reaches out and grabs Koba's hand. But looking back at his wounded comrades, Caesar reaches a grim decision. Koba no longer belongs with them. He releases his grip, and Koba plummets screaming to his death. Back on the ground, Caesar rallies the surviving apes at the heart of the settlement. They drag Malcolm from the subway, whom Caesar orders to be released. Malcolm urgently warns Caesar about an impending military attack and pleads with the apes to flee. However, Caesar acknowledges the sins of the apes, explaining that they have incited a war that humans will not easily forgive. Caesar advises Malcolm to leave before the ensuing conflict begins. The two share a brief, emotional farewell before Malcolm walks away. Reuniting happily with Blue Eyes and the rest of his family, Caesar stands amidst his fellow apes. They bow before him, acknowledging him as their rightful leader. Facing the dawn, Caesar stands tall, preparing himself and his apes for the storm of conflict looming on the horizon. Fast forward 2 years, deep within the forest, we stumble upon a group of humans, comprised of soldiers and ex-associates of Koba, quietly approaching an ape settlement. Without warning, they initiate a barrage attack, causing an uproar with numerous apes falling victim. Alerted, an ape sends an SOS to the ape troops, and in no time they respond with a powerful counter-strike, leaving almost all the soldiers in ruin. But Preacher, a lone soldier, survives, attempts to summon the colonel for reinforcements but ends up captured by the rampaging apes. Meanwhile, Caesar, joined by his trusted soldiers, makes his way to the attacked encampment, where they encounter the human survivors. Preacher, recognizing Caesar, confesses that they believed him to be dead and had been searching for him. Caesar counters, stating that the conflict wasn't his design but Koba's doing, explaining that Koba is no more and that he only entered the fray to safeguard his tribe. A captured red donkey, previously allied with Koba, speaks up about the colonel's brutal nature, menacingly warning Caesar, causing a ripple of anger among the apes. Consequently, Caesar instructs Winter to escort Red Donkey out of the scene. Caesar then decides to release the captives, sending them back to the colonel as a peace offering. However, Winter returns with news that Red Donkey has slipped away. By the lakeside, Caesar and Maurice share a somber moment. Caesar confides in Maurice, burdened by the lingering aftermath of Koba's deeds. Maurice offers solace, suggesting that no one could have foreseen Koba's treacherous rebellion. The atmosphere shifts as Caesar's son Blue Eyes and his friend Rocket return from a lengthy expedition. Eager to share the positive results of their journey, swiftly Caesar escorts Blue Eyes back to their concealed base, tucked behind a waterfall. Assembling the apes, a discussion unfolds about their future. Blue Eyes announces the discovery of a new haven, inaccessible to humans, sparking a surge of excitement among the apes. Winter, gripped by fear, insists on immediate departure to avoid a potential human attack. A stern Caesar quells Winter's urgency, agreeing with Blue Eyes that they need to handle their next steps strategically. He assures everyone that they will embark on this journey together. As darkness descends, Caesar stands watch over his sleeping family. A mysterious green glow trickling down the waterfall catches his attention. Upon closer inspection, he discovers a rope, a chilling indication of another human invasion. He alerts Blue Eyes, entrusting him to guard their family while he goes in search of the intruders. Luca is also informed about the impending danger. Within the sleeping quarters, Blue Eyes confronts and defeats an intruding soldier. Elsewhere, Caesar successfully ambushed one of the invaders, but not before the soldier could radio the colonel. The ape group overhears the colonel's communication, falsely confirming the demise of the ape leader. This dire news sends Caesar sprinting back to his family. The tense scenario culminates in a face-off between Caesar and the colonel, preparing to retreat. The colonel, realizing his mistake in identifying the slain ape, takes another look at the fallen bodies. Following his gaze, Caesar experiences the gut-wrenching sight of Blue Eyes and his wife lying lifeless. The colonel tries to take out the enraged Caesar, but he manages to evade the attack. As the rest of the ape family converge on the scene, the colonel slows them down with gunfire and beats a hasty retreat. Giving chase, Caesar pursues the colonel up the rope he is using for escape. Just as Caesar is about to close in, the colonel unsheathes his combat knife, severing the rope. Plunged into the river below, Caesar swims to safety. His eyes burn with a vow of revenge as he watches the colonel slip away. Back in his quarters, Caesar is told Winter may have betrayed them. The apes give Caesar some alone time and look for his young son. Paranoid, he finds some bullets, then hears footsteps. He prepares himself for attack, but he finds some solace when he discovers it's his younger son, Cornelius. He had been safely hiding during the altercation. In light of the previous night's ambush, Caesar makes the call to move the entire tribe to the newfound sanctuary revealed by Blue Eyes. He, however, decides to stay behind, seeking retribution and hoping to stall the soldiers from pursuing the fleeing apes. The apes embark on their migration while Caesar sets off toward the colonel's stronghold. Unbeknownst to him, he is being shadowed by Maurice, Rocket, and Luca. Despite Caesar's insistence on facing this alone, the three refuse to let him go into battle single-handedly, vowing to protect him at all costs. Thus, the quartet commences their perilous journey. Along the way, they encounter an abandoned village. While exploring, they spot a human collecting firewood. As the man hurriedly reaches for his gun, Caesar outdraws him, taking him down. Suddenly, a noise erupts from a nearby house. Anticipating another potential enemy, the apes storm the building only to find a young girl on the bed. Sensing no threat from her, Caesar orders the group to scour the place and gather what they can. Maurice, noticing something amiss with the girl, interacts with her. Realizing her vulnerable state, he urges Caesar to let them bring her along, knowing she couldn't survive alone. Initially reluctant, Caesar agrees to bring the girl along. Their quest for the human encampment continues until they finally spot one. Scanning the area with binoculars, instead of the colonel, they recognize Winter collaborating with the humans. Under the veil of darkness, the team stealthily infiltrates Winter's tent, taking him by surprise. Caesar wastes no time and demands the colonel's location. Winter reveals that the colonel has left the camp, heading for the border to join incoming soldiers from the north. When probed about the border, Winter shows ignorance. Winter goes on to admit that he gave up Caesar's hiding place in a deal with Red Donkey, guaranteeing his survival. On hearing this, Caesar's grief and fury over the loss of his family boil over. Winter, unnerved by Caesar's wrath and noticing soldiers nearby, attempts to raise an alarm. The group swiftly silences him, managing to avoid drawing attention. However, in the struggle, Caesar inadvertently strangles Winter, resulting in his death. Haunted by his actions later that night, Caesar is racked with guilt. His remorse conjures a vision of Koba's spirit in the camp, reminding him of the ape principle against fratricide. Maurice alerts Caesar that the soldiers are on the move, prompting the group to tail them. They follow the soldiers into a snowy, mountainous terrain where they observe the troops halting for an unexplained reason. Suddenly, gunshots echo through the landscape. As they take cover, the gunfire persists, leaving them puzzled about the targets. When the soldiers depart, in the blizzard abates, they venture out to investigate, only to discover dead bodies partially concealed in the snow. The team investigates the bodies, removing the sacks from their heads. To their surprise, they find one man still clinging to life, albeit in severe distress. When Caesar attempts to communicate with him, he realizes the man can't speak, mirroring the young girl's condition. Caesar, empathizing with the man's dire situation, mercifully puts an end to his suffering. Having lost the soldier's trail, they opt to surveil the landscape from a vantage point atop a tower. Amidst their focus, an opportunistic thief wearing a jacket tries to make off with their belongings, drawn by the distraction caused by the girl's toy. Luca spots the intruder from his perch and roars in alarm. Startled, the thief commandeers a horse and bolts. The group gives chase, but the thief proves too swift. The pursuit ends when the thief abandons the horse at a deserted mansion. Upon catching up, they cautiously explore the mansion, following sounds emanating from a dark fireplace downstairs. They prepare their guns only to be met by an unexpected sight. The surrendering thief is a fellow ape, known as Bad Ape. Interestingly, he seems unable to understand their sign language, a fact that puzzles Rocket, who doesn't recall seeing him before. Compassionate Bad Ape removes his jacket and wraps it around the shivering little girl. Later, by the flickering firelight, Bad Ape shares his tale. He's originally from the same zoo that Caesar once called home. He also reveals the unfortunate fate of his fellow apes who didn't survive, leaving him to endure in solitude. Finding unexpected companionship, he hosts a modest feast to celebrate their meeting. As they eat, Caesar inquires about the origin of the food. In response, Bad Ape discloses that he scavenged it from the border, which happens to be the exact location where the soldiers have established their camp. Caesar insists that Bad Ape guide them there, but he refuses, held back by fear. The group settles for the night, during which Bad Ape queries Caesar about the young girl. Caesar replies that they are all the girl has. Noticing Caesar's somber demeanor, Bad Ape inquires if he has children. As Caesar shares his story, Bad Ape empathizes, revealing he too has a child at the border. They strike a deal. If they help him find his child, he will guide them to the border. At dawn, the group, now including Bad Ape, sets off for the border. Upon arrival, Caesar orders Luca to reconnoiter the area more closely. However, their scouting mission is compromised by patrolling humans. Luca intervenes, pushing Caesar out of harm's way and engaging the enemy, killing one. When the second human threatens Caesar, Rocket leaps to his aid. However, Luca suffers grave injuries in the ensuing skirmish, and they retreat to a safer location. As they mourn Luca drawing his last breaths, Maurice implores Caesar to abandon his mission and rejoin the rest of their tribe. Rocket, however, argues for revenge. It's then that Maurice bluntly warns Caesar he's starting to resemble Koba. In a fit of rage, Caesar tells them to rejoin the tribe, resolving to infiltrate the encampment alone. On his solo venture, Caesar encounters a horrifying sight. Several of his apes dead, their bodies grotesquely displayed on stakes. He presses forward toward the edge of the encampment, only to witness a scene of utter despair, his entire civilization held captive. Spotting one of the apes still alive, he rushes to free him. The injured ape explains they were ambushed, and instead of being killed, they've been enslaved by the colonel. Before he can divulge more, he succumbs to his wounds. Out of nowhere, Caesar is struck from behind by Red Donkey and knocked unconscious. Upon regaining consciousness, Caesar finds himself facing the colonel inside the encampment. The colonel, intrigued by Caesar's solitary appearance, questions if he's come to liberate his apes. Caesar curtly replies that he's come to kill the colonel. When the colonel inquires about the identities of those he killed, Caesar discloses the details. Expressing regret for the misunderstanding, the colonel apologizes for Caesar's loss. He then questions how Caesar discovered his location, to which Caesar replies that he was informed, and further mentions that reinforcements are on their way to help exterminate the apes. The colonel appears to dismiss the news, and Caesar is led out to a cage, joining the rest of his captive tribe. The holding area is divided into two sections, one for the adults and another for the younglings. From across the divide, Caesar spots his son Cornelius calling out to him. Overwhelmed by the sight of his captured tribe, Caesar is flooded with regret for his actions. At dawn, the cages are unlocked, and the captors force the imprisoned apes into labor. The apes are being coerced into constructing a wall. Puzzled as to why the humans would need such a fortification, Caesar studies the surroundings and notes defensive turrets along the wall. He learns from a fellow captive that the tribe has been deprived of food and water for several days. Amid the exhausting labor, an emaciated ape causes an accident, inciting commotion. A soldier orders Red Donkey to discipline the culpable ape, leading to a cruel whipping. Unable to stand by idly, Caesar intervenes, demanding Red Donkey to halt. Encouraged by Caesar's defiance, the apes begin to vocalize their discontent. In response, the colonel orders his soldiers and Red Donkey to seize Caesar. In a show of dominance, they force Caesar to kneel, and Red Donkey begins to whip him before the colonel and the captive apes. After the whipping concludes, the colonel urges Caesar to order his fellow apes back to work. Despite the request, Caesar staunchly refuses, emphasizing that his tribe requires nourishment and hydration. As a response, the colonel shoots the weakened ape dead, turns the weapon towards Caesar, and begins a countdown. This action exerts a tremendous pressure on the enraged Caesar to succumb to his demand. Observing the escalating tension, one of the apes recommences the labor, and the rest gradually follow suit. This diffuses the standoff, but the colonel instructs Red Donkey to tie Caesar to a stake. Witnessing these events from a distance, Maurice and the rest of the group take stock of the desperate condition of the apes and strategize their rescue mission. As the night falls, Red Donkey releases Caesar from his restraints and escorts him to the colonel, who wishes to speak with him. In the command center, the colonel sternly warns Caesar against disrupting the work again, threatening that any such action will result in the systematic killing of his tribe. Unyielding, Caesar maintains his demand for food and water, arguing that without these essentials, the apes won't be able to complete their task. The colonel, however, dismisses his request, reminding Caesar of the power dynamics at play. Caesar then shares his observation with the colonel, asserting that the approaching armies from the north are not allies but adversaries. The colonel, taken aback yet appreciative of Caesar's astute understanding, concedes the truth. He elucidates the cause of this internal conflict, stating his belief that the apes, if not controlled, will soon outgrow the human race as dictated by nature's law. He further reveals the mutation of the virus that had nearly exterminated humankind. The evolved strain is now impairing their ability to speak and think clearly, a fate his own son had succumbed to. The colonel confesses to euthanizing his son and initiating a merciless purge of all infected individuals, actions that have resulted in the retaliation from the northern armies. His motive, he explains to Caesar, is to curb the rise of the apes and secure human supremacy on Earth. Reflecting this resolve, the colonel expresses his lack of remorse for the death of Caesar's family. In an immediate reaction to the colonel's insensitive remarks, Caesar lunges at him. However, Red Donkey and Preacher intervene to halt his assault. Shaken but unscathed, the colonel regains his footing and criticizes Caesar for his irrational behavior. That same night, Maurice and the rest of the group cautiously advance closer to the camp to devise a rescue plan. Maurice and Rocket explore possible entry points, while Bad Ape fervently opposes their venture. The unexpected arrival of some soldiers forces the group to retreat to a safer location. In the process, Bad Ape accidentally stumbles upon a tunnel. As dawn breaks, the soldiers at last distribute food and water to the captive apes, excluding Caesar, who remains shackled to the stake. Maurice and his team survey the discovered tunnel and identify a weak point that could be excavated to create a direct passage into the camp. Simultaneously, Bad Ape and the young girl venture out to observe the camp and notice Caesar's agonizing state. Despite Bad Ape's objections, the girl, overwhelmed by concern for Caesar, stealthily heads towards the camp. In the chilly conditions, Caesar begins to hallucinate, envisioning Koba, who goads him into surrendering. Amidst his visions, he discerns Red Donkey in front of him, who unties Caesar and compels him to work on the colonel's orders. Later, as Caesar rests in his cage, the young girl quietly slips in and hands him her doll. With the assistance of the other apes, she provides Caesar with food and water. This collective display of resilience heartens Caesar, reminding him of the power of unity. Suddenly, their secret assistance is threatened by approaching soldiers. On spotting this danger from their hideout, Maurice and the rest of the group decide to create a distraction. Rocket takes the initiative, making his way into the camp and causing a commotion to divert the soldiers' attention away from the young girl. As the soldiers swiftly surround Rocket, he launches at Red Donkey, igniting a brawl that is eventually halted by the colonel. Growing suspicious of potential threats from external apes, the colonel orders a patrol and incarcerates Rocket in the pen. Rocket suffers more beatings from Red Donkey before he departs, but he remains undeterred, urging Caesar to brace for an escape. The next morning, the colonel releases Caesar to work, but upon discovering the doll the girl had gifted him, he begins to question its origin. After a brief pause, he dismisses Caesar for work. Throughout the day, Rocket and Caesar collaborate to measure the steps leading to the pens, discreetly communicating their findings to Maurice and Bad Ape through sign language. Maurice and Bad Ape return to the tunnel and begin tracing the steps based on their directions. That evening, as the apes are herded back into the pens, Red Donkey chains Caesar back to his cage. He forebodingly informs Caesar that the colonel plans to kill the apes after the war concludes. Defiant, Caesar proclaims that the colonel will not emerge victorious and threatens Red Donkey with a similar fate, leaving him at a loss for words. Meanwhile, Nova, who had been observing the apes, rushes to Maurice to alert him that the apes are back in their pens. Impressed by her courage, Maurice praises her and christens her with the name Nova, which she happily accepts. As Bad Ape completes the excavation of the soft ground, the apes stealthily inspect the pen. Upon the departure of the soldiers, the apes quickly convene with Bad Ape, expressing their gratitude and introducing themselves. Maurice, however, notices a complication. The tunnel is flooding, making it impossible to dig towards the youngling's pen. They relay this information to Caesar, who swiftly devises an alternative plan. The apes initiate their plan by taunting the watchman, pelting him with mud, which lures him into the pen alone, where he threatens the apes. Unfazed, Rocket continues his mud assault, luring the guard into their pitfall trap. They manage to confiscate his keys and gun, gaining the upper hand in their desperate situation. Rocket and Caesar covertly lead the younglings to the main pen, where Caesar shares a heartwarming reunion with Cornelius. From there, the apes initiate their escape through the tunnel. Caesar, driven by a thirst for vengeance, remains behind to confront the colonel. Unexpectedly, the armies from the north launch an attack on the base. As the soldiers rush to mount a defense, Preacher makes a startling discovery. The ape pens are vacant. Outside the camp, the continuous bombardment from enemy jets impedes the apes' escape. Caesar, finding himself in the command room, encounters the colonel lying on his bed. He reaches for a gun with the intent to shoot the colonel, but to his shock, he finds the colonel stricken by the mutated virus, robbed of his ability to speak. Upon seeing the doll, Caesar grasps the circumstances. The colonel, in his desperation, guides Caesar's hand, prompting him to end his misery. Despite his desire for revenge, Caesar ultimately can't pull the trigger, laying down the gun and feeling a sense of pity for the pitiful colonel. The colonel, left in his torment, takes matters into his own hands, seizing the gun to end his life. The fierce battle persists outside. From the front line, a soldier along with Red Donkey spot the escaping apes and fire upon them, killing several. Caesar, witnessing this, grabs a handful of grenades and leaps into action. Meanwhile, Red Donkey begins to feel remorse for his past actions. As a soldier orders him to fetch a grenade launcher, he spots Caesar charging towards them. Caesar is about to hurl a grenade at a gas tank when he is suddenly struck by an arrow shot by Preacher. In the ensuing chaos, Caesar finds himself cornered, with Preacher ready to strike the final blow. Unexpectedly, an explosion consumes Preacher. Red Donkey, struck by remorse, had aimed the grenade launcher at Preacher. In retaliation, the soldiers fire at Red Donkey, then turn their guns on Caesar. Despite the danger, Caesar manages to grab the grenades, throwing them towards the gas tanks and sparking a massive explosion. He quickly retreats through the tunnel and barely escapes with his life. As he emerges from the tunnel, he witnesses the northern soldiers celebrating their victory over the camp. However, their jubilation is short-lived, as the explosion has triggered a massive avalanche. The apes scramble up into the tall trees to escape the oncoming rush of snow, while the humans are swept away before they can react. Caesar, injured but alive, also finds sanctuary in a tree, surviving alongside his fellow apes. Finally, the war comes to an end. The apes, no longer persecuted, journey towards a new home, eventually arriving at a beautiful savanna. However, their celebration is tainted with sadness when they discover that Caesar's wound has taken a turn for the worse. He has lost a significant amount of blood on the journey. Although Maurice expresses his concern, Caesar assures him not to worry. Caesar, reflecting on the peaceful surroundings, conveys to Maurice that the apes can carry on without him now, at peace and safe. Overcome with emotion, Maurice speaks for the first time, promising Caesar that he will preserve his legacy for Cornelius, Caesar's son. With a final smile, Caesar takes one last look at his tribe before drawing his last breath, content in the knowledge that his tribe, his family, is finally safe.